This video is brought to you by Squarespace. So this video was originally a how to register and create your own custom brush, but then I realized that I should explain the brush settings as well. And so I recorded everything and it turned out to be like a super long video, like an hour long. It was so long that I would have to cut this video into 2 parts. So in this video, I'm gonna go through the subtool detail window. I'll go through all the settings and explain what these does and how to use them. And I'll have a second video coming up soon, which will teach you how to register a material, create a custom brush, uploading it, all that stuff. So make sure you're subscribed to my channel for that, or if the video is already uploaded, there will be a link popping up on the top right corner. There will also be links in the description as well. So yeah, let's get into all the brush settings in Clip Studio Paint. But before that, I would like to thank this video's sponsor, Squarespace. So Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to create a website that's best suited for you. They've made the process of creating a website, a portfolio, opening a shop, all that stuff to be super easy. One thing that I really like and I'm really interested in right now is that they offer custom merch. So if you're watching this video, obviously you make a bunch of art, and something that you could do with that art is sell it. Squarespace has custom merch, so you can easily customize merchandise and then sell them on your website. You don't even have to handle like the production, inventory, shipping, any of that at all. All you have to do is choose a merchandise, upload your art, and then just start selling. Like, it's super easy. They have like over 400 premium products to choose from. So this is a super easy way to get passive income. You don't have to worry about payments as well, because Squarespace has a lot of flexible payments. Squarespace has made checking out like super easy. It's super seamless for your customers. They accept credit cards, PayPal, Stripe, Square, Apple Pay, and in eligible countries, they offer the option to buy now and then pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay. This gives your customers a whole lot of options when they want to get those goodies from your website. Also, most importantly, Squarespace has a new guided design system. This is called Squarespace Blueprint. If you're really worried about having to set up your own website, don't worry, it's easy. Just head over to the Blueprint section, select the pages you want. These are professionally curated layouts, and they have like a lot of styling options for you to play with. It's super simple. Just click some buttons and then boom, you got your own website. It looks good, it functions very fluidly, and you can get started on selling your art right away. They also come with SEO tools, which increases your discoverability on search engines, and this would put more eyes on your website, especially if you're trying to sell something. So get started. Head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, have fun creating your own website, try it out, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Samijan to save 10% off of your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. A little disclaimer, there are some settings that I won't be able to explain because I simply just really can't understand it. If you don't remember what a specific setting does, you can just hover your mouse over it, and in the information box, this would explain to you what it does. For this video, you will need the subtool panel and the tool property. You can find them in Window and down here. The subtool panel will show each option that you have in each tool. So this is the pen tool, and we have different types of brushes. It also has a pen category and a marker category. Same goes with pencil. There's 3 categories, different types of pencils, airbrush, different types of sprays, eraser, and so on. This applies to all of the tools here. As for tool property, these are the options for the specific tool you have selected. Like the G Pen, these are the settings for the G Pen. For the G Pen 2, I can adjust its settings. Calligraphy, change this as well, just like that. In the subtool panel, this button is to import downloaded assets and brushes that you got from the asset site. This one is to duplicate the specific tool that you've selected, and this is to delete. As for in the tool property, this is to reset the settings back to default. As for the wrench icon right here, this will bring up the subtool detail. I will be demonstrating with a regular G-Pen brush. This is the regular hard round brush. So there's a lot of settings to go through, and it can be quite intimidating, but if you understand it, you'll be able to make your very own custom brush much easier and with much ease. Trust me, this will be very beneficial to you if you understand these settings. Oh, one more thing before I get into it. You can see each of the settings will have a box on the left right here. If you tap on it, an eye icon will come on. If you think it's a setting that you would be adjusting a lot, turn on the eye icon so it appears in the tool property. Like brush size, we're always going to be changing the brush size, so this eye icon should be on, and it should be in tool property so we can adjust our brush size. If you don't want to do that though, you can turn that off. See, and it's gone. First category is brush size. This is obviously the size of the brush, and you will see a button to the right here. This button right here will appear on a few other settings as well. Not every setting, but just a few. And if you tap into it, you will be able to adjust the pen pressure, tilt, velocity, and random. You see if I tick off, pen pressure, the brush no longer has pen pressure. Simple. You can adjust the amount of pen pressure as well, or adjust with this graph right here. To delete an anchor point, just click and drag off the screen. So pen pressure is how hard you press your pen against the screen. Next up is tilt. You'd have to play with these settings a lot. This would have to be combined with a few other settings to see the results, but tilt applies when you tilt your pen against the tablet, obviously. But some tablets do not have this function. Newer tablets these days do have this function. So with this setting, with my pen upright, the stroke is very small, and as I put my pen down, the stroke is larger. Velocity will affect the speed. This affects the size of the stroke depending on the speed of your pen. So here I am going very slowly and then very fast. You can see in the middle right there, the lines are very thin. Last is random, and this just randomizes the size of the brush tip. And with this setting, this randomizes the size. Below brush size is specified by size on screen. With it ticked off, you can see if I have my brush set to 113 right here and then zoom in, the brush size is still at 113. If I made a really tiny brush and I zoom in, it's still that same size. So I'll reset the brush size to 100 and tick on specify by size on screen. And I'll try that again. Big brush stroke, zoom in. Oh no, it's smaller. I'll zoom in again. Now it's even smaller. Why is that? This means that the brush size is scaling along with how you zoom in and out of the canvas. This is a pretty annoying setting, so I don't really recommend it. And the last one below it is at least 1 pixel. In the information box, it says this option keeps the line width to at least 1 pixel so that the line doesn't break even when pen pressure or another dynamic is linked to brush size. I tried looking it up, but I really don't understand what this setting is. Moving on to ink. Opacity applies to how opaque the brush is. If I turn that down, it will become more transparent. You can see it has that little box that I talked about earlier. So that means I can change the effect of opacity with this brush through either pen pressure, tilt, velocity, or random. The most obvious results are pen pressure. So the opacity changes with the pen pressure. Blending mode. You'll see all of these blending modes. They are just the same as layer blending modes. The effect that this happens only applies to one layer and not any other layer. So for example, I'll choose multiply. With multiply, colors are darkened. So this red right now looks normal, but if I stroked again, this has the multiply effect happening on the brush. If I change the background color, you would see that it doesn't change the effect similarly to a multiply layer. That multiply is only applied to the brushes on this specific layer. Next up is color mixing. Tick this on to have a watercolor-like effect to the brush. It comes with these 3 settings: amount of paint, density of paint, and color stretch. With these settings at 100, it behaves just like a regular brush, but as I decrease these, you can see it has a more watery effect to it. And let me put another color down. You can see how the dynamic changed from a regular solid brush to a brush that can now mix colors. Amount of paint is, well, the amount of paint that you have. If you stroke on top of another color, your selected color would be very pigmented. With the setting at 0, this made the color very much less pigmented and mixed in with the background color. Density of paint. At 0, this would mean the paint wouldn't really affect anything unless it started from another color first. Lastly is color stretch. I'll lower these 2 down just to show you the effect. And as the name suggests, it stretches the color out. At 100%, it stretched out purple because the color has been mixed and it stretched out and dragged that color on pretty long. But at 0, it has less stretch, and thus you can see that small transition from purple to pink to be much shorter. With color mixing, you have 3 more modes: blend, running color, and smear. Changing to running color will enable the intensity of blur setting. So here we have 2 colors, and I'll show you the difference between 0 intensity of blur and at max. So at 0, you can see it doesn't blur and doesn't blend in very well. There's a very harsh line in these colors. At 200, it becomes more solid. You could adjust your own value or just go with automatic, which is the one on the left. Lastly is mixing mode. This is the mixing mode for mixing the drawing color with itself or colors already applied to the layer. The perceptual mode allows you to mix colors more naturally, while standard mode is the color mixing method from previous versions, which processes more quickly. It is set to standard by default. If you switch this to perpetual, you would be able to have more freedom to adjust the settings some more, but if not, just go with standard and let Clip Studio Paint do its job. Next is color jitter. This setting is to let the brush tip randomize colors. The first setting right here will continuously change the brush tip's color. So here I can change the hue, saturation, and luminosity. And it looks quite unappealing unless you made this a spray. The fourth row here says blend with subcolor. The subcolor that they're referring to is the secondary color you can see on your color wheel. If I change the subcolor and go back to my main color, you'll see the effect this has as I adjust the slider. I know this right here looks very unappealing, so I'll just quickly show you what it looks like with a spray. The brush tip of this brush is a circle, so once it's sprayed out, it looks like polka dots. And you can see that this is a lot more appealing than what I just showed you earlier. Back to color jitter, the bottom section is randomized per stroke. As the name suggests, it wouldn't change the brush tip, but it would change the color on every stroke that you do. So if you had like a very textured brush that looks like a paintbrush and you had randomized per stroke on, adjust the settings a little bit, you can make a brush that's really colorful, and I think this could be used in many creative ways. Checking randomized per stroke, we'll have this drop down menu right here. This applies to the blend with subcolor. You could choose to have these three settings affect just the top color that you have right there, the main color, just the subcolor, or both. If I tick both, turn on blend with subcolor, so it should mix in a bit of green that I have in the subcolor right there. Next up is anti-aliasing. This setting just smooths your brush out. Having it at the fourth will make the edges very soft. Having it at the first setting would make it very, very pixelated. You can see the difference between this edge and this one. Next up is brush shape. So in brush shape, you could easily just transform your brush into something else by choosing from these presets. Just choose one you like and then press apply brush shape. This turned into an airbrush with just a click of a button. Brush tip. So the brush tip right now is just a circle. This is the default. If you don't want to use a circle, you upload a material. I have the tip right here. I can just upload that and the brush tip has now changed. I can even add more than one. So now there's two brush tips in one brush. I'll go back to circle for now. Hardness is, well, the hardness. Have it at max and it's hard. Have it at low and it's airbrushy. Below that is thickness. Thickness applies to how the brush tip would be squeezed. The default is at 100, but if I had it at more than 100, it turned into an oval. Similarly, below 100, it also got squeezed, but in a different direction. Instead of going high or low value, you could choose the direction it squeezed from this right here as well. Don't forget about this box right here. Next is angle, which just rotates the brush tip around. Angle also has this special box right here, but it's different. Angle Dynamics has its own special settings. The way the brush tip spins around is very less likely going to be affected by something like pen pressure, so they made something different right here. First up is none. The brush tip is set in an angle and there's no effects to it. With direction of pen, align pen tilt with pen tablet when direction can be detected. With some pen tablets, when you rotate your pen around, it can detect the direction of where the pen is pointing at. I'm currently using an iPad, so I don't think that this effect would show up, but you can still see that the stroke is a little different from none. Pen tilt is, well yeah, pen tilt. Here's the stroke with my pen upright and the stroke with my pen sleeping. Direction of line will follow wherever the pen goes. So I'm going to demonstrate, but don't focus on the outline of the cursor that I have hovering right here. Focus on the brush that is being applied to the canvas. You can see that it's slowly rotating around along with the direction of my pen. Lastly is random, which just makes it spin around. For these two, I will talk about them later. And last is brush density. Brush density is similar to opacity, but this affects the entire stroke rather than just a single stroke. So the density is pretty low, and you can see that there are overlaps in the stroke. Compared to opacity, where there is no overlap unless there's another stroke overlapping it. Lowering your brush density makes it feel more like a marker, it feels more feathery, and it does have that box right there. There's a checkbox called Adjust Brush Density by Gap, but you'll learn more about that in the stroke category. Before moving forward, I would like to change the brush tip for this brush, just so that it can help with showing the next effects. And as you can see, this section is now unlocked, because it's not a circle. With a circle, you can't flip it. With material, you can. That's all it does. It just flips the brush tip around. Let me increase the gap for a second and see the brush tip flip around or flip vertically. So next up is spraying effect. Checked it on. It turns into a spray. particle size is for each individual brush tip. So if you see right here, even though my brush size is low, the particle size is still the same size. I put it up, particle size is still the same. The slider is to adjust the size of the particles without having to change your brush size. But that's a little confusing, so you can just check on this box right here. This would adjust the particle size along with the brush size. So I'll have my brush size a little big like this. You can see the circle. And I'll have the particle a little, how about this size? Yeah, and then check on brush size. This is the sizes of my particle. And if I adjust the brush size here, oh, the particles have adjusted along with the brush size. But some people like to have that separated just for more control. After adjusting the size, you can change the density, so more particles or less particles. As for spray deviation, this makes the spray closer to the center or more in a circle. And direction of particle. You can see my little arrow spinning around. And it comes with settings that is just like angle in the brush tip category. Next category is stroke. You could either choose one of these three, or you can just go with the first button, which allows you to adjust the gap yourself. At 0, they're all stuck together. And the higher you go, the more distant they become. The next one is continuous spraying. This effect is more noticeable with a spray effect turned on. So with it turned off, if I just hold and press my pen against the screen in a single place, it won't show anything unless I move the brush tip around. But with continuous spraying on, you can see it just keeps going. It'll just keep going. Correct velocity input, this just changes the dynamics across all the settings that you have with velocity adjusted. I think that's what it says, according to the information right here. Next up is ribbon. With this turned on, the brush tip would be able to seamlessly connect into a pattern. Like as you can see, as I stroke, it's slowly drawing out that arrow right there. There's also different repeat methods, but I've tried this out and I don't see any difference, so I don't really understand this one. Sorry. For the last option, blend brush tips with darken, I will demonstrate with this braid brush I downloaded. With the setting turned off, as I stroke, it would overlap and be on top. But with it checked on, this puts the stroke behind, in the back. That's it. That's literally what it does. I don't know why they came up with such a confusing name. And last subcategory is the texture. This just, well, adds a texture to your brush. Clip Studio comes with a lot of textures. Let's just go with this one. And you can't really see it because it's a hard solid brush. So if I turn down the density, you can see it in the preview right there. Yeah, there's now texture applied to this brush. There's options to change the density of the texture, invert the pattern, or emphasize the density. This makes it really grungy. You can scale, rotate, adjust the brightness and contrast of the texture as well. Having it super small will make it look like the ground in old video games. Rotate the texture around, adjust the brightness and contrast. There's also blending modes. Let's compare with normal and something like maybe multiply. There's also checkbox, apply by each plot. This just, emphasizes the color. Here it is turned off, here it is turned on. This just creates more overlap. Now that the brush shade category is done, moving on to brush 2. As the number suggests, this just puts another brush on top of your existing brush. Let's enable dual brush, and you can see in the preview that it has changed. You can change the blending mode, the brush size, and the secondary brush. So right now I've reset this to a circle brush, and now I have another circle on top of the circle. I'll change the brush shape so you can see the effect better. I'll choose a spray, and there's a spray along with my hard round circle brush. I'll try changing this to multiply, and you can see that the spray is now contained within the circle brush stroke. Checking on apply RGB value will just apply the effect on both brushes. So similarly to the spraying effect, you can change the brush size of the secondary brush or link it to main brush size. We have anti-aliasing, and down here are a bunch of brush shapes. If you want to add a brush to this list right here, just go to the brush that you want to add. Let's say I want to add this chalk. So I'll go to brush shape and then hit add to presets. And there it is. Go back to brush shape. Here's the charcoal brush and hit apply brush shape. I'll switch this back to normal so you can see everything clearly. There's the round brush along with the charcoal brush. Below that, brush tip. It's got the same settings as before, but this just applies to the second brush. Same with spraying effect, stroke, and texture. I'll go back to the category brush shape 2 and turn that off. Next up is watercolor edge. I use this a lot. This just adds an edge to your brush. This is to adjust the thickness of the edge, the opacity of the edge, and the darkness. Below that is process after brush stroke. You turn this on if you don't have a very strong or very fast laptop or PC or iPad or whatever tablet that you use. So as I stroke, you don't see the effect. It only applies when I lift my pen up. If you have a very complicated texture brush, you may want to turn this on because having the edge apply as you stroke, sometimes that'll slow down your system. With that turned on, you're able to access blurring width. This makes the edge super blurry. Next up is eraser. To play around with the first settings, you must first make a vector layer and then check that on. When you draw stuff on a vector layer, you can choose whether or not you want to delete a whole section or just like a regular eraser would. So I'll turn this into a transparent brush, and with the first setting, you can delete and erase just like how a regular eraser would. With the second option, you can delete in small sections. The third one is to delete an entire stroke. Very useful when you're doing line art on a vector layer. This one refers to all layers, which means if you have multiple vector layers and they're all for line art, and you can just check this option to erase all the layers. The last option is only applied when you're using an actual eraser tool. You have the option to erase on several different layers. Let me try blue on this layer, red on this layer, and then green on this layer. Go back to my eraser, check that on, and it erase everything on the canvas, ignoring the separate layers. Next category is corrections. Enable sharp angles for when you want to do shapes and you want them to be nice and sharp. You can see the example in here. You probably know what stabilization does. It turns your lines from something very fast and squiggly to something very slow and very neat. There's more options to adjust the stabilization by speed. Below stabilization is post-correction. This is different from stabilization where it will correct your lines and make them a lot neater without you having to do anything. Post-correction up high, and you'll see that right after I lift my pen up, the line changes, the strokes change, and they're just a lot more neater. There's more options to adjust by speed, scale, and Bezier curve. Bezier curve. Line after correction becomes quadric Bezier curve. So this is, okay, it's the anti-circle checkbox, I guess. Next up is taper. This is to adjust the ends of your strokes. Here's what it looks like at the lowest setting. The ends of my strokes are very sharp, and here's at max. They're very round and thick. Below that is an enable snapping checkbox. If you have a ruler on your layer, this will snap to the ruler. So I will create a new ruler layer, and if I have it off, I can draw it very freely, turn it on, this will snap to the ruler. Lastly is vector magnet. This works on a vector layer. If you have several strokes, Clip Studio will consider these all separate strokes. But if you have vector magnet on, this will combine several strokes into one. At least that's what the information box says. Next category is starting and ending. This affects the start and the end of your brush stroke. So there's a lot of options to pick. You have to make sure that whatever brush you're using actually has that setting turned on. Let's try out with brush density. So I'll go back to brush tip, lower the brush density so you can see the effect. Go back to starting and ending, and then check that box. So here's what the brush stroke looks like normally. If I set starting to 5,000, you can see that it has a different effect to the start of the stroke, similarly with the ending. And the last category, anti-overflow. This will affect what you draw on your layer and what appears on other layers. So to demonstrate, on this layer, I have this blue. I'll create another layer on top and pick pink. And when I stroke on top, this will be on top of the blue because this layer is on top of the bottom layer. If I set the blue layer to reference, go back to my layer and check on this box. Anything that I draw on this layer will avoid that blue right there. The option below that is fill up to vector path. If the first layer that I'm referencing is a vector layer, and I go back to my pink layer, check this on, you can sort of color in like this. Lastly is the area scaling option, which is how close the pink layer will affect the vector. So here it is at -20. You can see that there's a gap right there. And at 20, this completely fills it in, overlapping the vector line. And there you have it. It's done, finally! The subtool detail panel is done. Let's say if you adjusted a brush and you really like it, make sure you hit this button right here to save all settings as default, or if you want to revert back to normal, just hit reset settings to default. Now that you've accumulated all of this knowledge, now what? You've learned all the settings, you know what everything does. What does that mean? Does it mean you always have to create a new brush to fit your needs? No. Sometimes you can just download a brush and then change up the settings to how you like. It's a matter of problem solving of what kind of brush that you need. Let's say that all the brushes that you have are just the Clip Studio Paint default and you're using the G Pen. It's super hard, super solid, you want to use this for line art. Maybe this brush is too hard, so how do you make it softer? Maybe you could go to opacity and turn on pen pressure. Now it's a lot softer. Maybe it's too soft for your liking. Adjust that again. Maybe this is better. And then you may think, oh, my lines are a little too rough. Now what? Oh, I want them smoother. Go to stabilization, turn that up higher. Okay, now my lines are a lot smoother. Or if you think, oh, the end of the lines are too sharp. I want them to be a little rounder. So just bump up the taper. Now it's a lot shorter and not too sharp like that. Or you've downloaded a brush, you don't like how the particle size doesn't change along with the brush size. You know that you can just go to spraying effect and tick on brush size. So the particle will change along with your brush size. And you want to be switching between that brush size or particle size a lot. You can turn that eye icon on and it'll appear on the tool property on the left here. Hit the plus sign and here it is. You can switch between the settings more conveniently now. Or maybe you downloaded a cute decorative brush like this star brush. It's made by me. It's free to download on the asset site. There's links in the description. And maybe you like the solid ones, but you don't like the outlined one. You will remember that, oh, okay, if a brush has a lot of tips, that means there's a lot of materials. You can just go to brush tip and look at all of these brush tips and just select and delete the ones that you don't like. So now this brush only has the solid one. Or let's say that you want to add more details, but you don't want to go through that process of having to go through doing more line art and then having to fill on another layer. This is a problem that I personally had. And when I found out that there's a watercolor edge, I use it all the time with all of my pieces. Select the color of the detail that I want. I like to add more hair detail, turn on watercolor effect, and then add more hair. All right, one final example I want to give you. I really want to show this off because I think the creator of this is super smart. So for this brush right here, I've adjusted the settings a bit just to show that they have a lot of brush tips right here. And instead of using all these little tulips to stamp and having to manually turn them around, what this brush does, I'll reset settings to default, is that you can stroke and then give the angles of the flowers and the placements yourself. This is so smart. How they did this was using ribbon. You can see the difference in the preview window right there. So you can see how important it is to know your brush settings, how to utilize them and make your life a lot easier, make your work process a lot faster. I really hope you found this video useful. If you have any questions, please comment down below and stay tuned for the second video coming up soon. Thanks so much again for watching. That's it. Bye.